What if your greatest ideas outlived you? What happens when visionaries leave us too soon? Number 7. Dennis Ritchie, the quiet revolutionary behind modern computing. Ever used a smartphone? Typed on a computer? Browsed the internet? You can thank Dennis Ritchie, even though you've probably never heard his name. While Steve Jobs grabbed headlines with sleek Apple products, Dennis Ritchie quietly created the foundational technologies that made those products possible. When Ritchie passed away in October 2011, just a week after Jobs, his death received a fraction of the media attention. Yet his contributions to technology were absolutely monumental. Ritchie invented the C programming language in the early 1970s while working at Bell Labs. This might not sound exciting, but imagine creating a language that would eventually power everything from nuclear submarines to microwaves, from Mars rovers to video games. C became the most influential programming language in history, and virtually every major programming language since has been influenced by it. But Ritchie didn't stop there. Along with colleague Ken Thompson, he developed the Unix operating system, the grandfather of Linux, Android, and macOS. When you use your iPhone, you're using technology descended directly from Ritchie's work. Unix is basically a simple operating system, but you have to be a genius to understand the simplicity, Ritchie once said, revealing his characteristic modesty. What makes Ritchie's story particularly poignant is the timing of his death at age 70. He lived to see his creations become ubiquitous, but died just as the smartphone revolution, built on the foundation of his work, was transforming society. The iPhone, Android phones, and cloud computing all rely heavily on principles Ritchie pioneered. Ritchie created the technological equivalent of the alphabet and basic grammar that most modern computing communicates through. He built the foundations, but never saw the full scope of the digital world his innovations would enable. His colleagues remember him as brilliant yet humble. Brian Kernighan, who worked with Ritchie for years, said, "He was the kind of person who would do incredible work and not need to tell you how incredible it was." In an industry now known for big personalities and even bigger egos, Ritchie was content to change the world quietly. Perhaps most telling about Ritchie's legacy is that his work continues to be relevant and essential. Programmers still learn C as a foundational language. Unix principles still guide operating system design. The digital world continues to be built on the frameworks he created decades ago. When Ritchie passed away, there were no magazine covers, no global news headlines, no social media tributes from celebrities. But every text message sent, every website visited, every app opened carries his influence. The quiet revolutionary who built our digital world never saw just how vast that world would become. Number 6. Alan Turing, the code breaker who envisioned artificial intelligence. Can a machine think? This question haunted Alan Turing long before most people even imagined computers as we know them today. Alan Turing's brilliant mind helped win World War II by breaking Nazi encryption codes, potentially shortening the war by years and saving millions of lives. But his vision extended far beyond code breaking. He essentially conceptualized the modern computer and artificial intelligence decades before the technology existed to build them. Born in London in 1912, Turing showed extraordinary mathematical talent from an early age. By his mid-20s, he had already published groundbreaking papers that established the theoretical foundation for computer science. His 1936 paper introduced the concept of a universal machine, now known as a Turing machine, that could simulate any computer algorithm. This seemingly abstract idea became the blueprint for every computer that followed. During World War II, Turing led the team at Bletchley Park that cracked the German Enigma code, allowing Allied forces to intercept Nazi communications. Winston Churchill later said that Turing made the single biggest contribution to Allied victory against Nazi Germany. After the war, Turing turned his attention to the possibility of machine intelligence. In 1950, he published Computing Machinery and Intelligence, introducing what became known as the Turing test, a method for determining if a machine could exhibit intelligent behavior indistinguishable from a human. He predicted that by the year 2000, computers would be able to fool people into believing they were human about 30% of the time. We can only see a short distance ahead, but we can see plenty there that needs to be done, Turing wrote, unwittingly describing his own truncated future. Despite his contributions to defeating fascism and laying the groundwork for the digital revolution, Turing's life ended in tragedy. In 1952, he was prosecuted for homosexual acts, then illegal in the UK. Given a choice between imprisonment and chemical castration, he chose the latter. 2 years later, at just 41 years old, Turing died from cyanide poisoning. His death was ruled a suicide. Turing never lived to see his visionary ideas about computing and artificial intelligence come to fruition. The computer revolution that began in earnest in the 1970s and 1980s built directly on his theoretical work. Today's efforts in machine learning, neural networks, and AI all trace back to questions Turing first posed. When Turing conceptualized machines that could think, computers filled entire rooms and had less processing power than today's digital watches. He never saw personal computers, smartphones, or the internet, let alone the sophisticated AI systems now emerging that can generate art, write text, play complex games, and even engage in conversation. In 2009, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued an official public apology for Turing's treatment. In 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted Turing a posthumous pardon. In 2017, legislation informally known as Turing's Law posthumously pardoned thousands of gay men convicted under historical legislation. Today, Turing is celebrated on the British £50 note, and the highest honor in computer science, the Turing Award, bears his name. But perhaps the greatest tribute to his legacy is the technology that surrounds us, technology he envisioned when it seemed like science fiction to almost everyone else. Number 5. Nikola Tesla, the electrical wizard who dreamed of wireless power. Ever wonder what happened to the man who wanted to give the world free energy? Have you heard about the inventor who envisioned smartphones in the 1920s? Nikola Tesla died alone and nearly penniless in a New York City hotel room in January 1943, his revolutionary vision of wireless power transmission still unrealized. The 86-year-old inventor, who once lit up the World's Fair with his alternating current system and partnered with industrial giants, spent his final years feeding pigeons in parks, his genius obscured by financial troubles and increasingly eccentric behavior. Born in 1856 in what is now Croatia, Tesla showed remarkable intelligence and creativity from an early age. After immigrating to the United States in 1884, he briefly worked for Thomas Edison before striking out on his own. What followed was a period of extraordinary invention and innovation that helped establish the foundations of our modern electrical world. Tesla's most successful invention was his system of alternating current AC electricity, which won out over Edison's direct current DC system in what became known as the War of Currents. Today, AC power distribution remains the standard for delivering electricity worldwide. When you plug anything into a wall outlet, you're using Tesla's technology. But Tesla's ambitions went far beyond conventional electricity distribution. He became obsessed with the idea of wireless power transmission, the ability to send electricity through the air without wires, making it freely available anywhere on Earth. In 1901, he began construction of Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island, intended as the first broadcasting system for wireless electricity. It is not a dream, Tesla insisted. It is a simple feat of scientific electrical engineering, only expensive, blind, faint-hearted, doubting world. The project ultimately failed when investor J.P. Morgan withdrew funding, reportedly asking, "Where does the meter go?" The question revealed the fundamental conflict between Tesla's vision of universal access to energy and the capitalist desire to monetize it. Wardenclyffe Tower was demolished in 1917, and with it, Tesla's dream of wireless power transmission seemed to collapse. Tesla's visionary ideas extended well beyond electricity. He described a device that sounds remarkably like today's smartphone. We shall be able to communicate with one another instantly, irrespective of distance. And the instruments through which we shall be able to do this will be amazingly simple compared with our present telephone. A man will be able to carry one in his vest pocket. He also predicted unmanned vehicles, vertical takeoff aircraft, radar, and remote-controlled weapons, all decades before they became reality. His patent for radio remote control in 1898 was so ahead of its time that many people thought it was some kind of magic trick. As Tesla aged, his eccentricities grew. He claimed to have received signals from Mars, developed strange phobias, and became increasingly isolated. The scientific community largely dismissed his later ideas as the ramblings of a man who had lost touch with reality. Yet in recent years, Tesla's reputation has undergone a dramatic revival. The electric car company named in his honor has brought renewed attention to his contributions. Wireless charging technology for phones and other devices represents a small-scale version of what Tesla envisioned. And researchers continue to explore the possibilities of wireless power transmission, though not yet on the global scale Tesla imagined. The irony of Tesla's legacy is that many of his far-fetched ideas have become commonplace realities, yet the wireless power grid he considered his most important contribution remains unrealized. When he died in 1943, his grand vision of free energy for all had been reduced to feeding pigeons in the park, telling one friend, "I have fed pigeons, thousands of them, for years. Thousands of them for who can tell?" Would Tesla be satisfied seeing his name on luxury electric cars? Or would he still be pushing for his original vision of unlimited wireless energy available to everyone? Number 4. Grace Hopper, the admiral who democratized computing. Did you know a woman helped invent the way we talk to computers? Have you heard of the naval officer who found the first computer bug, literally? When Rear Admiral Grace Hopper died in 1992 at age 85, personal computers were just beginning to become household fixtures. The internet was in its infancy. Smartphones didn't exist. The coding revolution she helped spark was only just beginning to transform society. Born in 1906, Hopper defied convention throughout her life. At a time when few women pursued advanced education, especially in mathematics, she earned a PhD from Yale in 1934. During World War II, she joined the Naval Reserve, becoming one of the first programmers of the Harvard Mark I computer, a room-sized calculating machine used for military purposes. But Hopper's most significant contribution came from her fundamental belief that computers should be accessible to everyone, not just mathematicians and scientists. In the early days of computing, machines had to be programmed using binary code, endless strings of ones and zeros. Hopper thought this was absurd. "It's much easier for most people to write an English statement than it is to use symbols," she said. "So I decided data processors ought to be able to write their programs in English, and the computers would translate them into machine code." This revolutionary idea led her to develop the first compiler, a program that translates human-readable programming language into machine code. Her compiler transformed programming from a specialized mathematical skill to something that could be learned by a much broader range of people. She went on to lead the team that created COBOL, Common Business-Oriented Language, one of the first high-level programming languages. COBOL made it possible for businesses to use computers for everyday operations, helping spark the information revolution. Hopper also popularized the term debugging after literally removing a moth that had gotten trapped in the Harvard Mark II computer. She taped the insect into the logbook with the note, "First actual case of bug being found." Throughout her career, Hopper pushed against institutional resistance. When told something couldn't be done because "we've always done it this way," she would reportedly hand out compasses to her team members. "These are for people who want to do things the same old way. Use them to draw the circles you'll go around in." This became one of her signature philosophies. "Humans are allergic to change. I try to fight that." Hopper retired from the Navy at age 79 as a Rear Admiral, the oldest serving officer in the U.S. Armed Forces at that time. Even then, she continued working as a consultant well into her 80s. She received the National Medal of Technology, the first individual woman to receive the honor, along with numerous other awards and honorary degrees. When Hopper died in 1992, her vision of making computing accessible to everyone was still unfolding. The explosion of user-friendly personal computers, graphical interfaces, and eventually smartphones all built upon her pioneering work making computers speak more human languages instead of forcing humans to speak machine language. She never saw how programming languages evolved into the tools that now power our digital world. She never witnessed children learning to code in elementary school or the rise of app development, or how her compiler concept led to hundreds of programming languages that drive everything from social media platforms to space exploration. In her later years, Hopper often carried around a piece of wire about 1 foot long. When asked about it, she would explain that it represented the maximum distance light could travel in 1 nanosecond. This visual aid helped her explain to non-technical people just how fast computers operated. It was typical of her approach, finding simple ways to make complex technical concepts accessible to everyone. The most important thing I've accomplished, other than building the compiler, Hopper said, is training young people. They come to me and say, "Do you think we can do this?" I say, "Try it," and I back them up. She believed in pushing the boundaries of what was possible and encouraging the next generation to think bigger. The technological revolution she helped launch was still in its early stages when she passed away. Would she be amazed to see how her vision of accessible computing has transformed society? Or would she simply say she expected nothing less? Number 3, Steve Jobs, the perfectionist who transformed technology into art. What happens when a college dropout changes the world? How did a man known for his temper inspire such devotion? When Steve Jobs died of pancreatic cancer on October 5, 2011, at just 56 years old, the world lost not only a technological visionary but a cultural icon. His death sparked unprecedented public mourning for a business leader, with impromptu memorials appearing outside Apple stores worldwide. President Obama called him among the greatest of American innovators. Jobs had just stepped down as Apple's CEO weeks earlier, knowing his time was short. He had witnessed Apple's remarkable resurgence under his leadership, transforming from a nearly bankrupt company in 1997 to the world's most valuable corporation by 2011. But he wouldn't live to see the full fruition of many technologies he helped pioneer. Born in 1955 and adopted as an infant, Jobs showed early signs of both brilliance and rebelliousness. He dropped out of Reed College after 1 semester but continued auditing classes that interested him, including a calligraphy course that would later influence Apple's focus on typography and design. In 1976, Jobs and friend Steve Wozniak founded Apple Computer in Jobs' parents' garage. Their early computers helped spark the personal computing revolution, but it was the Macintosh, introduced in 1984, that truly embodied Jobs' vision of technology as both powerful and accessible. With its graphical user interface and mouse, it made computing intuitive in ways previously unimagined. After being forced out of Apple in 1985, Jobs founded NeXT Computer and purchased a small computer graphics division from Lucasfilm that would become Pixar Animation Studios. His years in the wilderness proved crucial to his development as a leader. When he returned to Apple in 1997, he brought a new perspective and discipline. What followed was arguably the greatest corporate turnaround in business history. Under Jobs' leadership, Apple released a string of revolutionary products: the iMac, iPod, iPhone, and iPad. Each embodied his philosophy of merging technology with liberal arts and design. "It's in Apple's DNA that technology alone is not enough," Jobs famously said. "It's technology married with liberal arts, married with the humanities, that yields us the result that makes our hearts sing." Jobs was notoriously demanding, often abrasive and sometimes cruel to employees. His perfectionism was legendary. He once rejected an iPod prototype because the headphone jack made the wrong sound when clicked. Yet this relentless pursuit of excellence produced devices that changed how we communicate, work, and live. What makes Jobs' untimely death particularly poignant is that he didn't live to see the full impact of his vision. When he died, the iPhone was just 4 years old. The iPad was only in its second generation. Apple Watch, AirPods, and HomePod weren't yet released. Apple's market capitalization has more than quintupled since his death, eventually becoming the first company to reach a $3 trillion valuation. The technologies Jobs championed, touchscreens, virtual assistants, app ecosystems, have become so ubiquitous that it's easy to forget how revolutionary they once seemed. Features he personally helped develop, like Siri, were still in their infancy when he passed away. Today's advancements in augmented reality, wearable technology, and smart homes build directly on the foundation he laid. Beyond specific products, Jobs didn't live to see how profoundly Apple would transform retail, music distribution, publishing, and even urban design. Apple stores, which he meticulously designed as gathering places rather than mere retail outlets, have become architectural landmarks and social hubs. The music industry, revolutionized by iTunes, continues to evolve with streaming services building on that digital foundation. In his famous 2005 Stanford commencement address, Jobs reflected on mortality. "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important." Jobs knew his time was limited, pushing him to focus intensely on creating products that would outlast him. In that same speech, he said, "Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do." The greatest testament to Jobs' legacy might be that Apple products continue to follow his vision years after his death. Current CEO Tim Cook has often spoken about asking himself, what would Steve do when facing difficult decisions? Apple's new headquarters, Apple Park, sometimes called the spaceship for its circular design, was one of Jobs' final projects. He presented the plans to the Cupertino City Council just months before his death, showing his characteristic attention to every detail. As technology continues to evolve at a dizzying pace, one wonders, what would Jobs think of today's Apple? Would he approve of its direction, or would he once again push for something completely different? Number 2, Ada Lovelace, the Victorian visionary who glimpsed computing's future. Did you know the first computer programmer lived in the 1800s? Can you imagine foreseeing the digital age when steam power was cutting-edge technology? When Ada Lovelace died of uterine cancer in 1852, at just 36 years old, the concept of a computer as we understand it today didn't exist. There were no silicon chips, no electricity in homes, not even typewriters. Yet this Victorian mathematician had already written what is recognized as the first computer program and envisioned machines that could manipulate symbols, create music, and process more than just numbers. Born Augusta Ada Byron in 1815, she was the only legitimate child of the Romantic poet Lord Byron. Her parents separated shortly after her birth, and her mother, fearing Ada might inherit her father's volatile temperament, immersed her in mathematics and logic from an early age, unusual subjects for a girl in 19th century England. This unconventional education prepared Lovelace for a fateful meeting in 1833 with Charles Babbage, a mathematician and inventor. Babbage had designed a mechanical calculating machine called the difference engine and was working on plans for a more sophisticated machine called the analytical engine. Though neither machine was ever fully built during their lifetimes due to funding issues and engineering limitations, the analytical engine's design featured many elements of modern computers, including memory, a processor, and punched cards for programming. Lovelace became fascinated with Babbage's analytical engine. In 1843, she translated an Italian mathematician's memoir about the machine and added her own extensive notes, which ended up being 3 times longer than the original text. In these notes, she described an algorithm for the analytical engine to compute Bernoulli numbers, widely considered the first published computer program. But Lovelace's vision extended far beyond just calculations. While Babbage focused on using the machine for numerical processing, she saw much broader possibilities. The analytical engine might act upon other things besides number. The engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. This insight that computers could manipulate symbols and not just crunch numbers was revolutionary. She essentially predicted that machines could someday create music, produce graphics, and process any kind of information that could be symbolized. She glimpsed the digital future a century before the first electronic computers were built. Lovelace also understood the limitations of such machines, writing that the analytical engine has no pretensions to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. This observation anticipates modern debates about artificial intelligence and machine creativity. She coined the term poetical science to describe her interdisciplinary approach, believing that imagination and intuition were crucial to understanding mathematics. Imagination is the discovering faculty, preeminently, she wrote. It is that which penetrates into the unseen worlds around us, the worlds of science. Lovelace's life was cut tragically short. She died from uterine cancer in 1852, the same age at which her father had died. She left behind 3 children, her groundbreaking notes on computing, and a vision of technology's potential that wouldn't be realized until long after her death. For nearly a century after her death, Lovelace's contributions faded into obscurity. It wasn't until the 1950s, when computers began to develop rapidly, that her notes were rediscovered and their significance recognized. The U.S. Department of Defense named a programming language, Ada, in her honor in 1980. What makes Lovelace's story particularly poignant is how far ahead of her time she was. She never saw an electronic computer. She never witnessed the digital revolution her work anticipated. When she wrote about machines composing music or creating graphics, such capabilities were more than a century away from reality. Today, as artificial intelligence systems generate art, music, and text, we're seeing the fulfillment of possibilities Lovelace glimpsed while writing by candlelight with quill and ink. Modern computers execute billions of algorithms per second, each one a descendant of the program she wrote for a machine that wasn't even built in her lifetime. Would Lovelace be surprised by today's technology, or would she simply nod in recognition of what she had already foreseen in her mind's eye? Number 1. Aaron Swartz, the digital rights activist who championed internet freedom. What happens when brilliance collides with the justice system? Who decides who can access human knowledge? When Aaron Swartz took his own life on January 11, 2013, at the age of 26, the internet lost one of its most passionate advocates. Facing up to 35 years in prison and potential fines of $1 million for downloading academic articles from JSTOR, Swartz chose to end his life rather than fight a legal battle that many viewed as wildly disproportionate to his actions. Born in Chicago in 1986, Swartz was a programming prodigy who helped develop the RSS web feed format at age 14 and co-founded Reddit in his late teens. But unlike many tech entrepreneurs who focused on building wealth, Swartz dedicated himself to ensuring the internet remained a force for public good and open access to information. Information is power, but like all power, there are those who want to keep it for themselves, Swartz wrote in his Guerrilla Open Access Manifesto. This philosophy drove his activism. He believed that academic research, much of it publicly funded, should be freely available to everyone, not locked behind expensive paywalls benefiting publishers rather than researchers or the public. In 2008, Swartz downloaded millions of federal court documents from the PACER, Public Access to Court Electronic Records database, which charged fees for access to public domain documents. Though the FBI investigated, no charges were filed because the documents were technically public records. His fateful confrontation with the justice system began in 2011 when he connected a computer to the MIT network and downloaded millions of academic articles from JSTOR, a digital repository. Though JSTOR itself declined to pursue charges after Swartz returned the data, federal prosecutors brought charges under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, a law many critics consider overly broad and draconian. The prosecution offered Swartz a plea deal requiring him to serve 6 months in federal prison and plead guilty to 13 felonies. He refused, believing he hadn't done anything wrong. The government then increased the charges, ultimately threatening him with decades in prison. The prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, combined with depression he had battled for years, proved overwhelming. His family blamed the prosecution directly. Aaron's death is not simply a personal tragedy. It is the product of a criminal justice system rife with intimidation and prosecutorial overreach. Swartz's death sparked outrage across the tech community and beyond. Tim Berners-Lee, inventor of the World Wide Web, wrote, "Aaron dead, world wanderers, we have lost a wise elder. Hackers for right, we are one down. Parents all, we have lost a child. Let us weep." What makes Swartz's story particularly poignant is how much of his vision for the internet remains unrealized. He championed an open, democratic internet where knowledge flows freely. Yet today, academic research remains largely behind paywalls. Internet freedom faces increasing threats from both governments and corporations, and online surveillance has become pervasive. Swartz never saw the successful campaigns against the Stop Online Piracy Act (SOPA) and Protect IP Act (PIPA) legislation he had vigorously opposed bear fruit when the bills were defeated shortly after his death. He never witnessed the growth of the open access movement in academia, with many universities now requiring publicly funded research to be freely available. He didn't see the rise of platforms like Sci-Hub that have made millions of academic papers accessible, albeit controversially. Perhaps most significantly, Swartz never saw how his death would galvanize efforts to reform the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Aaron's law, introduced in Congress multiple times since his death, would modify the CFAA to prevent prosecutors from bringing disproportionate charges for minor computer crimes. Though the bill has not yet passed, it represents ongoing efforts to create the more just system Swartz envisioned. In a blog post written when he was just 19, Swartz mused, "Be curious, read widely, try new things. I think a lot of what people call intelligence just boils down to curiosity." This insatiable curiosity drove him to explore how technology could serve humanity, not just commerce. Lawrence Lessig, Harvard law professor and Swartz's mentor, wrote after his death, "He was brilliant and funny, a kid genius. A soul, a conscience, the source of a question I have asked myself a million times. What would Aaron think?" The tools Swartz helped create, from RSS to Reddit to the Creative Commons licensing system he worked on with Lessig, continue to shape how information flows online. His political organization, Demand Progress, continues to advocate for internet freedom and civil liberties. But the fully open, democratic internet he envisioned remains an aspiration rather than a reality. At his memorial, Swartz was remembered through his own words, "Think deeply about things. Don't just go along because that's the way things are or that's what your friends say. Consider the effects of what you do on others. Know that you can break the rules. You don't have to be bound by expectations or constraints." How different might today's internet be if Aaron Swartz had lived to continue his work? What battles would he be fighting now for digital freedom?